Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Synergies Tier List video. Today our analyst will be ranking each synergy from S all the way down to C tier. There's definitely some traits that are clearly above the others, but overall the meta is quite diverse. That means the power difference between a lot of these tiers is not that great, as you can often find ways to play around almost any synergy. With that said, let's dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright folks, let's get back to the video, and to start it off, we've got the S tier, which consists of Starship, Rebel, Cybernetic, and Sorcerer. This tier represents the traits that are dominating and have a large influence on the meta itself. First up for the S tier is Starship. Aurelion Sol has finally climbed the ranks to be at the top after the mid-season update, and for a good reason. He's currently considered a bit too strong by a lot of players because he's difficult to kill, does good damage, and on top of that, his fighters drain the mana of enemy champions. You can often throw this Starship into any composition and he'll do quite well. All in all, it's nice to see Aurelion doing well in the meta, but maybe he's doing a bit too well. Moving on, we've got another synergy that Aurelion Sol is a part of, Rebels. Of course, Rebels are doing well not just because of Aurelion, but him being strong certainly does help the trait. Jinx is the other Rebel that's shaping the meta around her, so naturally, you can play both her and Aurelion while slapping in another Rebel for the buffs. Besides the champions themselves being good, the Rebel trait is also quite versatile as it's played in a wide range of builds. The most common are 6 Rebels with 4 Brawlers and 3 Rebels, but the trait can also be paired with the Mech. So you've got a ton of options as you can play anywhere from 3 to 6 Rebels. Next up, we've got Cybernetics. Cybernetics have really been dominating the game since the mid-season update. The reason for this is Vayne and Echo. Vayne, being a reliable backline carry that's safe against a lot of threats because of her ability, has made Cybernetics way more consistent than previously. It's also possible to run 6 of them without Echo, so you can get the trait online and stabilize much earlier in the game. Echo's rework has proven to be incredibly strong, which has made the late game of Cybernetics insanely good. Granted, the trait did well previously in the game, but oftentimes had a win condition of Aurelion 3 or Misfortune 2 with upgrades. Now you can run Vayne in the mid game and Echo to secure the late game, and that's almost all that you need, along with some filler champions. And the last S tier synergy is Sorcerer. This likely isn't much of a surprise considering how many builds there are that use Sorcerer. Whether it's splashing 2 Sorcerers or playing 6, you've got so many options with the trait. Just to name a few of the popular ones, you can have Riven with 6 Sorcerer, Mech with 6 Sorcerer, 4 Sorcerer variations of both of those builds, and 2 Sorcerer Mech using Gangplank. Victor has helped Sorcerer by being a reliable carry. Now you have early game units like Ari that you rely on while transitioning towards Victor in the mid game, and if you want, there's Xerath to round out the late game. That's the thing about Sorcerers, you have so much flexibility with the synergy itself as well as the champions. Now that we're done with the S tier, let's move on down to the A tier, which consists of Infiltrator, Mech-Pilot, Brawler, Chrono, Vanguard, Mystic, and Blaster. This tier is for synergies that are above average in strength and viability in the current meta. They don't shape the meta as much as S tier traits, but they're certainly important pieces. Starting out A tier, we have Infiltrators. Infiltrators are in an interesting spot as the synergy itself is decent, but the champions are truly what defines its strength. At the moment, you're not going to see a lot of 4 Infiltrator, though it does have a place in a variation of Mech, but where the trait truly shines is in 2 Infiltrator. The 2 best Infiltrators, specifically in the mid and late game, are Fizz and Echo. You'll see these 2 in almost any build with or without Infiltrator. That's just how good they are. Coming up next is Mech-Pilot. Mech has really found its stride with the mid-season update as it's no longer reliant on a specific playstyle. In the current meta, you can run Mech with the standard Infiltrators or different variations of Sorcerer builds, a mixture of the 2, or even run it in Rebels. By beefing up the Super Mech itself, they've made it an extremely potent frontline that's hard to kill and does good damage. Because of that, it opens up the ability to focus on running different synergies with the Mech as opposed to just Mech Infiltrator and slow rolling to 3-star all of your units. All in all, the Mech is in a much healthier place than it used to be in terms of versatility. Brawlers are next in our A tier, and they've become a premier frontline for a lot of builds. 4 Brawlers is definitely more situational and is most commonly paired with Jinx, but playing just 2 Brawlers brawlers is quite common. The main reason as to why the synergy is doing well is the flexibility of its champions. All of the champions besides Alawi have a place in the current meta. Even Alawi is used, though mainly only in the early game. But the strength of the other brawlers is what really helps this trait shine. Chrono is still one of the top splash traits in the game. It has so many champions you can play that it's almost impossible not to have this trait in any build that you end up playing. That said, you're unlikely to run more than 2 of this trait, but as a splash trait, it's definitely one of the best. Moving along, we've got Vanguards. Vanguards have fallen a bit out of the meta, mainly due to the prominence and reliance on Last Whisper on the majority of AD carries. But this trait, along with Mystics, did shape the meta towards what it is now, so it still has its place. Mainly, you'll see it as a strong source of an early frontline, though 4 Vanguard and even 6 can still do well. Above all of that, though, you've got Wukong as the central champion for this synergy, as he provides a ton of CC and makes it possible to play Chrono. Since we've talked about Vanguard, we might as well also talk about Mystic. Mystic also shaped the meta in 10-12, but has mostly been relegated to a splash trait in 10-13. But that's not a bad thing considering how useful it is to have your whole team's magic resistance buffed, especially with the amount of Sorcerer builds that there are. All in all, it's still a fantastic synergy, though you won't really see 4 Mystic anywhere near as much as you did in 10-12. And for the last trait in the A tier, we have Blaster. Blaster's in an odd spot because it serves almost entirely as a means to help Jinx. Even in that regard, it's only used for 2 blasters and rarely, if ever, 4. So it may seem odd that it's an A tier, but the fact of the matter is that Jinx is such a dominating champion that both of her traits have a place in the meta. Let's move on to the B tier now, which consists of Demolitionist, Mercenary, Protector, Battlecast, Mana Reaver, Paragon, Celestial, and Blademaster. The synergies in this tier are about average in viability and usefulness. Occasionally they can do more, but most of the times they're relegated to the sidelines as a secondary trait. To kick off the B tier, we have Demolitionists. This is a trait that has certainly suffered from the champion and item it lost to the mid-season update. Despite being way less flexible, it's still useful in the right situation. Gangplank still has a place in the meta, primarily in Rebels, though he can also be tossed in with Mechs and Sorcerers. Ziggs and Rumble are a strong duo early game, and Rumble is of course used in Mech. So overall, it's still a viable trait, it's just much harder to find a place for it, seeing as there's only 3 champions. Speaking of Gangplank, we have Mercenary up next. As mentioned, Gangplank still has a few compositions he's a part of in the meta, but he's not quite as scary as he once was. A big reason for that is Mercenary upgrades being much less impactful. In particular, the nerf to his larger radius upgrade hurt a lot. So while he's still a good champion, you don't always need or even want to pick up his Mercenary upgrades. Up next is Protector. This is a trait that can do well, specifically in the Mystic Protector build, but as a whole, it's just not quite up to par with the other frontline traits like Vanguard or Brawler. The main reason is that a lot of the champions just need to be buffed to become more viable. It's telling that the best champion of this synergy is when you can get a spatula and make Aurelion Sol into a Protector. Urgot is also strong, but a majority of the time he's played without his traits in mind because his ability is so incredibly strong. Once a few of the Protector champions are buffed, you may see it rise up in viability again. Battlecast is hard to pin in the meta right now. In general, it's only useful early game and falls off late game, and the champions tend to be a bit more useful than the trait itself. But there's certainly a possibility of it rising up on the tier list as more people explore how to properly play it. Unfortunately, Mana Reaver has suffered harshly from the removal of Kassadin. It's an amazing synergy, but it's far too inflexible to be used often outside of Cybernetics. Paragon is a trait that does fill a niche quite well, but it's rare that you'll find yourself benefiting from it. Most of the time, Janna, just on her own, is way more valuable than the trait itself. Until Star Guardian becomes better on its own and thus is more viable, it's unlikely that Paragon is going to matter that much. It will continue to be played purely because Janna herself is just really good. Just like Mana Reaver, Celestial has suffered from Kassadin being gone. It's just harder to splash in the trait without him. So if you run Protectors, it's easy, but outside of that, it's just difficult. Even with Lulu being a good champion, it's difficult to find a place for Celestial. Blademaster is the last trait in the B tier because it's having a hard time finding a place in the meta without Kale. Yes, 6 Blademaster with Master Yi is an option, but it got nerfed and was already not the most consistent of builds prior to that. With Kale gone and Xayah not being being a reliable carry, it's difficult to make use of the trait outside of Cybernetics. And now we're on to the last tier, the C tier. This consists of Astro, Sniper, Star Guardian, Space Pirate, and Darkstar. Synergies in this tier are below average and don't provide as much as traits in the other tiers. Astro is a trait that was doing quite well in 10-12, but fell off hard once the main build using it, Astro Sniper, became less viable in the meta. The main issue with Astro is that it has good champions, but fitting 3 together can be difficult if you're unable to fit in Teemo. If Teemo gets buffed to be more viable, whether himself or his other trait, Sniper, you will see a return to prominence for Astro. Since we mentioned it, the next synergy is Sniper. Sniper is a trait that overall just doesn't do enough. Sure, a damage bonus is nice, but it's also distance-based, making it highly inconsistent. But by far the biggest reason for Sniper being C tier is that Jhin is no longer seen as a reliable carry. Builds using him can still top 4, but overall he's not enough of a threat. Star Guardian continues to live in the shadow of the Sorcerer synergy. Without buffs to this trait, it's going to be difficult to ever rate it highly, as Sorcerers just do more, plus a lot of the champions in the trait are Sorcerers. Next, we've got Space Pirates. Space Pirates can still be good early game, but gosh, after that point they fall off substantially. It's just too difficult to make them work as a trait outside of the early game, despite having good champions like Gangplank, Jace, and Graves. And for the last trait in C tier, we've got Darkstars. Honestly, this trait almost got pushed down to the D tier, but there are times it's still useful. The thing about Darkstar is that the trait itself is not bad. In fact, it's better than it used to be and is way more flexible. The issue is that the champions have a hard time working together in this trait, so running anything beyond 2 is quite difficult. With a few buffs, this trait can easily rise in viability. That's all we've got for today's tier list video. There's definitely a power gap between the top synergies and the bottom synergies, but overall the middle of the pack is fairly balanced. Let us know in the comment section below what synergies you think should be higher or lower on the tier list. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.